Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Podcast. With me, as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. How you doing, Mitch?
Hello. Very good, thank you.
And we are thrilled to have on the show someone we've been planning to hopefully get on for a little while now, but he's here in his comfy digs up at Byron Bay. It is the CEO of ANTG, Matt Cantello. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew and Mitch. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much. It's we've got so much to discuss with you, given how big a player ANTG is in the market here in Australia. But perhaps before we dive into that, do you just want to give us a bit of an overview of your background, how you fell into the medical cannabis space in Australia?
Absolutely, yeah, and it was a bit of a falling into it, that's for sure. But yeah, my previous experience, my previous life was building and leading a large ASX travel company. Began small in '97, the ripe age of 23. I started up a business on my own in Melbourne. And those first 3 to 4 years were pretty tough, but certainly a huge learning curve. And soon after that, I met Jamie Ferris out of Brisbane. And after a couple of years of discussions, we merged in 2000. And from there, the company really took off. I believe we sort of had the secret sauce, and it was based on good business fundamentals. They sort of underpinned the company. And the results of that were, until COVID, we achieved every financial target for pretty much every quarter for 20 years. But what's more, I think our cultural indicators, staff satisfaction, staff retention, customer satisfaction, were incredibly good. And so we took that startup from the late 90s to an ASX listed company in 2010. Finally, sort of employing over 3,000 staff around the world at a market cap of over 3 billion. But I think the greatest joy that I got from that experience was seeing the number of staff who ended up holding shares after our listing. I think it was about 75% on the day, and they all did very well out of that. And that gave me a lot of joy to see the people that helped build the business actually benefited financially from it. So moving forward after 2010, when we listed, 2011, we decided to go overseas. So two reasons we listed on the stock exchange. One was to expand our brand globally. We believe we had that secret sauce and we could take the model elsewhere. And two was to give our staff the opportunity to hold shares in the business, and we achieved both. But the first business we acquired was in 2011 in Denver, Colorado. And so I moved over there for a few years. And it was just in time to see the medical program in its infancy had already been rolled out, but the full-blown 2011 medical program was rolled out while I was there. And then, of course, that moved into recreational in 2012, 13. And so I watched this happen right before my very eyes. I think I was pretty lucky because not many people get to see a medical and recreational cannabis program roll out, and just how the observations I had from that were quite profound in many ways. Obviously, the anecdotal medical stories that came out of it, which I'll come back to, were gut-wrenching and pulled on your heartstrings, but also the socioeconomic benefit to the state that, I don't know whether those socioeconomic, I haven't really looked at the stats lately, but certainly early on in the piece, we were seeing things like opioid overdoses were significantly down, youth crime down. All the stats, the early stats looked really good, and I thought to myself, wow, this has got legs. It's only a matter of time before cannabis will be legalised in other parts of the world, including Australia. So that's when I just started crystal balling and I started thinking about the possibilities. And came home in 2013. I'd had a long stint with CTM, and I decided to make a big jump. So I kept my shares in the company, but I left the executive role and really just started building my knowledge around the cannabis space for about 2 years, building knowledge and expertise and surrounding myself with people that were very smart in their respective fields. Moving forward to 2015 and 16, we launched ANTG and began to plan and then began to build out our facilities while simultaneously breeding our high CBD plant called Eve under our hemp license, which I can come back to later. But obviously the reason it was a high CBD plant to breed was because it was under hemp license and not under medical. So we were lucky because we got a head start in that regard. 2017, we'd invested a lot of money into the business and we could see that it was going to be a slow burn in Australia. So we decided to head off over to America And long with the short of it, in 2017, we acquired a fully licensed cultivation, manufacturing and distribution business in San Fran, just out of downtown, actually. This is where we cut our teeth, and we built enormous knowledge and IP around breeding and genetics, manufacturing, and distillates, isolates, all that stuff. Really was a huge eye opener for those 4 years that we've been there too, 4 or 5 years. We brought that IP and that knowledge back to Oz with us, which again is really valuable. 2018, we saw the first of our research projects take off, because I'm a big believer in industry leading research. I think it's our job. And so we approached Professor Matt Dunn from the University of Newcastle. He's from the Cancer Research Signalling Department. We believed in our hearts that Eve displayed some great anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial characteristics, and it had a fairly unique terpene profile. So we sort of, Matt was a little reluctant initially, but we sort of forced a check on him to start the research. And that first 6 to 12 months was really just analysing the plant's chemical profile, but that moved on to acute myeloid leukemia, which I'll get to. But it's certainly our hunch of anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial characteristics was right, because he's now proven it in lab, in vitro. But 3 years after we started that, we're moving towards full-blown clinical trials. And Professor Dunn, he's gone from being a skeptic to an absolute believer. I think the letter that I got from him in the end of year 2 was, when Matt first approached me, I was a skeptic, and I told him it wasn't going to be the silver bullet he was looking for, but I'm now a believer. It's my job to get this information out. He's since published a peer group reviewed journal based on how high CBD, low THC can affect acute myeloid leukemia in particular. And in the lab, Eve has killed cancer cells, but kept healthy human cells alive. Now, obviously, that's not full-blown clinical. We need to understand that we might get different results when we go there. But early stages in the lab, I think we've really found something that's quite unique. Since then, we've signed up to 2 more research projects that will both begin soon. Unfortunately, COVID hampered our clinical kickoff dates, but we're looking at precognitive impairment or pre-dementia, which we know is a huge problem to society, and it's going to get worse. The statistics show that 1 or 50% of us are going to be directly impacted by that, whether a loved one or ourselves. And so, of course, governments around the world are throwing money at it. But we have certainly kicked that off with the University of Western Sydney. We've done all the pre-work. It's now just getting into the actual clinical. And the other project, which we'll be planning out very soon, is an IBS project. So that's sort of where we got to over those number of years. But as I said, I think it's important to really recognise that industry has a responsibility, an obligation to put its money where its mouth is when it comes to investing in research. We need to provide doctors, especially Australian doctors, who are a little bit more risk averse, and also their patients and wider community, that it's safe, which you guys know, I know, but we need to provide that data, and more importantly, the efficacy data, which takes a lot longer and a bit harder to get out. But yeah, that's really the crux of how we got here.
Amazing. That is an incredible story. And I'd say, yeah, definitely the experience you've had thus far, something that was for sure lacking in the early days in the Australian scene, and potentially is still in some respects. But I mean, most people, when they think of ANTG, I think at least the feedback from the community that I see is that, a very strong cannabis flower presence, let's put it that way. I know you guys have got all different products, but when I hear about ANTG, I do hear about flowers mostly being talked about, which tends to be the hero products, if I'm not mistaken. But in saying that, I'm very curious to know a little bit about your genetic program, your breeding program, how you're selecting the types of strains or the seeds you want to work with in the first place, how you're choosing to select phenotypes, things like this. Obviously, no IP, but what you can give us, the people are interested. So, there's a few very famous strains you've got out there at the moment. How did they come to be?
Yeah. Yeah. Now look, our flower strategy has been at the crux of everything we do. You know, without great starting material, you're not going to have great end material. So we really focused on that, the flower being the most important part of the journey. And, you know, America gave us great insight into what strains could produce a lot more resin, what strains were, you know, better to grow indoor versus greenhouse versus outdoor. You know, what strains really showed a good terpene profile that characterized it in a more specific way. And that's really been our focus. But I mean, I can't take all the credit for that. There's no doubt about that. We highly value our head of plant performance is the name of the title, Rangi Folder, who's been with us for the whole journey. I call him my chief wizard. We place a huge value on the genetics. He certainly places a huge value on the genetics, even more important on the breeding program. As I said, greatly assisted from our Californian experience, but of course we had to start from scratch here. We had to buy seeds from Canada initially. We didn't have the New Zealand amnesty, unfortunately, and US wasn't a legal market to buy them from. So we searched high and low for the best genetics we could kick off with. Out of Canada, and we found what we thought were really good starters, and we're right. I mean, Rocky or LF and Solace Tangi, we believe were really good, strong cornerstones to start with, but complementing probably our real cornerstone being Eve, our high CBD plant. And I'll give you a bit of background about how that came about. You know, we started growing high CBD under a hemp license back in, I think, 2015, and Rangi has now bred over 8 generations, and we've moved into plant breeder rights. It's actually quite a process. I'm not sure if you're aware, but it's quite a process. It takes years to do it, but we're well underway with plant breeder rights with Eve, and we've started the process with some of our other genetics as well. I mean, the sort of the final piece to the final flower that we've got in market right now is good old OG Kush. You know, you can't beat it. And so when we saw that on the list, we were like, that's a staple, and that's great for us to be able to breed with as well, which we've now done. And you know, our first female being Eve, that's why she was called Eve. We managed to push 19.5% in the hemp field of CBD, and as I said, it became the centerpiece for our breeding program. We've recently bred Eve and Rocky to come up with a really nice balanced strain. It's actually slightly higher in CBD than THC, around 13.5% CBD, 12.5 THC, which is a really strong profile. I think 25, 26, possibly one of the test results came out at 27 total cannabinoids, which for a balanced strain is pretty good. So launching that on market here in Australia and possibly Germany. We're yet to talk to them about that in depth, but yeah, in Australia, it's going to be launched probably within the next month. Probably not in time for Christmas, but certainly the new year. Then further beyond that, I mean, it takes, as you guys probably know, it takes a good, well, really 12 months from inception to commercial product when it comes to breeding programs.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you might be able to push something out in 9, but if you do, you risk not picking the best phenos. So where we've moved on from here, we've gone and Rangi would be the best. He might even have to come on and have a chat with you guys. Yeah. He's gone and selected all the best of what he can see, and then bred it all together. And we've got hundreds and hundreds of different strains that we've bred. Now he's going through the selection. He's gone through the selection process with a handful of sativas and some mid-strength indicas. And now he's looking at the balanced strain and how we can sort of incorporate that to get 4 to 1s, 4 to 2s, and something a bit different out there in the market. But yeah, look, we place so much value on it. My favorite part of the month is when I can get to our research facility and I can get my head in there and have a good chat with Ray and find out what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Head and, sometimes you just got to follow your nose when you're in a place like that.
Yep. Or have your head in the weeds.
Exactly.
But, and it's interesting too, the sort of, that sounds like a very comprehensive breeding program that you guys have had now ongoing for, it's probably one of the reasons why you'd be considered, veterans in this nascent industry here in Australia, but clearly backed by a lot of knowledge from North America as well. But, we hear so many doctors, because the level of education is around, hasn't really sort of penetrated beyond CBD and THC, I find that a lot of the flower and oil products in Australia are often, kind of not like for like, in the sense that they're not starting necessarily with the same starting genetic materials, but the actual balances. And that's why when you talked about the 4 and 2 and some of those more interesting things, I'm just curious, and maybe this is one for the Wizard, but are you doing anything in particular to try to also get a greater expression of minor cannabinoids like CBG and CBC, and also to, I guess, have a rich terpene profile? Is there a focus there for you guys?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. And, CBG has been high on the agenda for Rangi for quite some time. We do have a couple of CBG plants that he's playing with. He hasn't given me too much more knowledge on that, so I'm not pushing him. But yes, that's certainly a focus. And terpenes, no doubt. I mean, as I said, the terpene profile of Eve was just so unique. When we went and compared it with every other high CBD flower we could find, there was a couple of terpenes in there, and I will keep that knowledge to myself, although it is common knowledge anyway. But there was a few unique terpenes in there that just really expressed heavily, and I think that led to their uniqueness in many regards. But yeah, it doesn't stop there. I think we've got the breeding program sits in one facility, and right next door we've got a grow methodology research lab. So we put them under stress, we put them under different lights, we put them under different, all different growing conditions to come up with what is mold resistant, what is microbial resistance, I should say. That the M word, the other M word's horrible. What expresses more under fluence or under LED versus the old, the old lighting. So yeah, we sort of, I think we did start that program a good sort of 2 years ago, and it was where Rangi was highly focused, and we got a lot of good stuff out of that then produced some of our current genetics that are coming through. But that's an ongoing process, as you guys probably know. We're going to keep doing that till the day we die.
It's great. I also was curious when, we've seen recently changes in the market, how, I think it's fair to say when the industry was first starting, that oils were central to what was being prescribed. I'm not sure if that arose because doctors have an idea of how to dose something more accurately. I'm not sure, but we've seen this, proliferation of flower products in the market, and the take up has been enormous. And I know ANTG has been sort of front and center of that, but I'm just curious, was the plan all along to get into that flower space, or did you have all this flower that was intended to be, extracted and turned into oil, but you decided, you know what, there's a flower shortage, let's jump in?
Well, it's a good point. I often don't take no for an answer. When I first thought about what products we're going to hit the market and what's going to sell well, and looking at other markets, including Canada, of course, and Colorado and California, all these places, I believed that flower was going to take over oils as the dominant format in Australia in due course. I didn't know how long, but I knew it was going to happen. And of course, we asked a lot of doctors, we asked a lot of health professionals what they thought of our strategy to push flower through maybe for our oils while building the formulations, and they told me I was silly. But I just couldn't help but feel, if you look at every other market, both medical and rec, but focusing really on the medical, eventually flower is the more dominant format, and Canada was no different. Legal medical markets in America were no different. And as we're seeing here in Australia, it's finally happening in a quick way. Like, I think it was 40% of prescriptions last month, and my prediction is that's going to push above 50, in the next 6 months, if not higher. So I think we bet on the right horse there, and a lot of it was to do with onset. Yes. I think a lot of medical patients have had some experience with cannabis. You guys would agree with that. And they know what they know what they like, and that's what they want. So we listen to what patients out there, new Australian patients, maybe not new medical cannabis patients, but we listened to what they were screaming out for just by looking at the stats around the rest of the world. We're not that different from Canada. We're not that different from certain parts of America, So it was probably the right the right choice to make, I think. Our oils are, we took our time with developing them. We got Justin Sinclair, who you guys probably know, on board some time ago, and he's now heavily involved. He's loving it up at the lab there with Rangi, actually, and they're formulating some wonderful oils, and those oils will all reflect or be complementary to the flowers. So we'll have a rocky oil, we'll have an Eve oil, we'll have Solace and both Mariposa, and then the one-to-one. And we'll also start developing those same products in vape form. We are already developing them in vape. Obviously, creating a vape oil is a bit different to creating an oral oil, but we are well on the way to getting the three different prongs, being flower, oil, and vape, of the same products to market in the coming 6 months. So we really are excited about that.
That's actually quite novel. I'm just thinking about, just basically, so from a patient side, they just, it might be a process of, working with their doctor to just find the strain that works for them. And then when they have that option around method of delivery, that's great. I'm really, really impressed by that. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's important to keep innovating. I think innovation's a word that's thrown around a lot, but while we're talking about these sort of strains that we've already had in development for a while, and the more different formats that are coming, we're also thinking of next year and the year after. And I think that's what's important for any successful medical cannabis company.
Yeah, and I think tying back into the question from before and that point, do you see flower sitting at the forefront, I guess, rather into the future, or do you see potentially different product formats taking over, or where do you see it sitting in your seat?
That's a crystal ball.
We love crystal balls here.
But that's one I can't quite answer. The reason I can't answer it is because I think a lot of the medical patients that are buying flower are they've had some experience. They might have grown up in the 60s, or even the 90s, where it's fairly common for them in maybe in a university days or whatever. And I think we're still seeing a lot of those types of patients who have been self-medicating for years, and now they're all of a sudden legally allowed to self-medicate. But I don't know about the new generations. I really don't. I mean, there is a big. You hear about schools that have got nicotine vape issues, or not even maybe nicotine. I don't even know what's in those juices that these kids are selling at schools. I think it's terrible. But, there is younger people that are attracted to that, which I don't think is a good thing. Let me just be clear on that. But as they become adults and they need medical assistance, and cannabis happens to be the format that helps them, then I don't know whether. I'd certainly think there'll be a move away from flower in the longer term, but certainly vaping for that quick onset is important. Oils, and then there'll be so many more novel products that come onto the market. But we're really cautious about creating novel products, because we look around the world and they don't really sell very well.
Yeah,
you've got to sustain your business. You can't build a whole bunch of lozenges or gum that all of a sudden you believe people are going to want. You've got to listen to your customer base and give them what they want, and try to anticipate the future as best you can.
That's why when I see stuff like CBD toothpaste, I always just think, really, is that anyway?
Healthy gums.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you've got a cut there or something. I'm not sure. Gum infection. Something I definitely wanted to ask you about now: sterility. In Australia, we have some very strict protocol in this country.
I knew you were going to go here, Mitch.
Yeah, I just want to hear it from somebody who's living and breathing it every day, breathing clean air, that is, obviously. How do you feel about the level of scrutiny with which Australia looks at kind of microbial limits in Australia compared to, say, what you have to do in Europe or Canada? Is that something that you feel is a positive thing, is a negative thing? I'm just curious to get your kind of stance on that.
Look, the standards are very high. Sometimes some would say a bit too high. If you look at Germany, their limits of microbial are much higher, and they're still safe as far as the German health department is concerned. New Zealand and Australia took a different angle. Look, I've been an advocate of the TGA and the ODC just because I think that they've done the best with what they've had. Yeah, certainly they could have done things better, but I think, based on the market here, the doctor network they've got to deal with here, our patients, I think they've probably done the right thing. Whether that changes in the future, I don't know. And it's a tough one because we like having those high standards because it allows, it's a high barrier of entry, which is good and bad, of course, because we don't want to run out of product, but it's also ensuring that the cleanliness of the product is second to none. And patients who buy Australian grown produced product are assured that TGA 93, TGA 100 is categorical every time they open a product. Well, they should. And I think that that's a good thing. Germany, yeah, they've been a little bit more, I suppose, flexible with their limits, and it's not a bad thing, but it's a tough one. Every health department around the world has a slightly different spin on oral inhalation, whatever.
Yeah.
They're not aligned.
But in terms of thinking about irradiation, for example,
Yep.
you're definitely killing anything that would be potentially harmful. But when you think about how many millions of people have smoked non-irradiated,
Oh yeah,
with positive effects over the years, obviously it changes when you're in a commercial grow situation to some degree, but you're also potentially removing some of that stuff, which, the terpenes, more volatile compounds, which might make it potentially an even better product in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, like, what is it? Herbs and spices have been treated that way forever and a day, right? I don't know if anyone's done any pre and post testing of basil after,
Yeah,
but it would be a good exercise.
still good in the oven.
Yeah, but look, from all the data I've seen, we've seen absolutely minimal degrading of terps and cannabinoids from that process. If you get it right, I think, you can get it really wrong. You can over zap it. So, and you can actually really affect the structure of the tracks and everything in it. But, if it's done at the perfect level for the reflection of what's in that batch, then, it's the only option that Australian companies have got at this point, because their levels of 200 TYMC, I know you guys probably know that. I don't know if we're listeners, but that level it's like a Panadol or a Ventolin inhaler. It's as clean as you can get. And I think the good part about that is that it just gives, if doctors and patients are aware and understand what that means, it gives them really good comfort that they're not going to be, inhaling or eating any microbials.
And I'm thinking it's something like 10,000 plus or 20,000 over in Europe, maybe, and maybe even
50,000 in Germany.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And even higher in the US potentially?
US is 40,000. In California, California is 40.
Yeah, interesting. Because you wouldn't need to, is it the case that when the level of tolerance is that high for microbial or mold and things like that, that you don't actually need to irradiate products from those parts of the world? It's really a bit of an Australian thing, or?
Yeah, I think so. And obviously, as we know too, once you ignite and combust a material, it pretty much kills anything in there anyway. So people can have that. But I think, people really want to know that what's in that jar or that bottle is clean as a whistle. And I think that's a good thing for the minute. That might change in the future, but I don't know. I mean, we look at Canada for our lessons to some degree, and their limits are lower, and they didn't have the same scrutiny from the health department early on like we did, and certainly their imports into Australia, and this is a hot topic right now, of course, don't have to go through the same scrutiny as ours. But I mean, I don't want to blast the Canadians too much. I love Canada. It's one of my favorite places to travel. But when it comes to the cannabis industry, they seem to have got it wrong. I'll be blunt. We're learning lessons from those Canadian failures. Just look at the most recent reporting results of the big 4 LPs in Canada. I mean, the results, in a word, are horrible, absolutely horrible. They're not running good businesses that are going to last. So you head across the border down into the US, where cannabis companies there are hamstrung for obvious reasons, and fed state reg differences. But you just have a look at TrueLeave, and I know TrueLeave's got a rec market available to them now, which, when they were medical, it wasn't as expansive. But, the Florida customer base is a population of 20 odd million. It's smaller than Australia, but they're tracking to annualize over like $1 billion in revenues in the next 12 months with huge net margins of 40 to 50. Compare that to the large Canadian LPs, they're losing tens of $millions of investor money.
Yeah.
While they're still paying out huge salaries and bonuses to executives. And I just don't think that's going to last forever. And why I paint that picture there is I think some of that philosophy or mentality on first movers take all the money and spend it big and you'll end up with something excellent. I mean, obviously it's not really that smart. And you look to Australia, where we seem to be doing the opposite, barring a few exceptions. We certainly are. We're growing into the demand. We're not trying to make the demand, because no one can do that. And it was, I mentioned financial sustainability, and while that is very important, we also believe it's vitally important, to build culture that reflects your values. And part of our values at ANTG is, and it's been from day one, from our very first session that we had, a senior leadership session back in 15, 16, we wanted to ensure that we're patient-centric. Our mission in life as a business is to enhance the well-being of our patients, listen to those patients, and then develop products that they need and want, and then execute, I suppose, on all of those aspects to ensure that you've got overall success, happy customers, happy shareholders, happy bank balance. But, one thing that I really love to do, and I think we were very successful at CTM with this, is to build that culture within staff groups from day one, have them be a part of that culture, have them, not just be part of it, but to dictate the terms of how we operate, how we go about our daily business. So, I think that's really important, that I just wanted to get that across, that, a lot of Australian companies really need to take heed from where they've gone wrong in other parts of the world, and build a program, a business model that avoids those risks.
Well, there's definitely been a few companies that, I mean, the Canadian learnings and learnings from other markets around the world are there for all to see. But unfortunately, I think there have been a few companies, won't name names, that have followed in the Canadian footsteps of, overshooting, sort of attempting to confect demand. And, it is gradual, and I think we sometimes forget in the industry that it's as gradual for everyone in the industry as it is for the regulators. And the recent changes that the TGA has announced, it's bit by bit, they're just as much along for the ride as well. But yeah, certainly it looks as though certain countries in Australia, I know you guys have been dealing with Germany a little bit, they're sort of following a similar trajectory to Australia in terms of the manufacturing and quality standards, which I think is a very good thing. And it will actually be really interesting if Australia does go recreational, how that skewers, I guess, the progress that has been made to date, whether that would, open up to a flood of new investment. I'm sure it would. While we're crystal balling here, do you have any, any ideas about what it's all going to look like in the next 5 years? Are you expecting it to go recreational by then?
Well, it won't. I don't think it'll happen under a Liberal government.
Agree.
It might go on the ticket for Albanese in this next election, but I doubt it. If he looks overseas and sees the success of Trudeau, then he might. In my personal opinion is I'd rather get our medical program established a bit stronger before we do that, because you're right, it'll get muddied. And I would rather have some more clinical data to back ourselves up, some more patient numbers that are showing positive benefits, medical benefits, before we open it up to the masses. So I don't think it's going to happen for 5 years, but I could be wrong. And you never know; these things can change quickly. But one of the reasons why I think we should support local. Obviously, I'm saying that I'm a bit biased. Locally produced versus international, and let's let's be honest, most of the international stuff is from Canada. There is some stuff coming out of South America now, and I welcome that competition. But why would you grow in Canada when you can grow in Australia? I mean, and why would you buy Canadian when you can buy Australian? I mean, we're such a colloquial group. You know, we've always the green and gold kangaroo. It's a big part of our lives. And I certainly, when I look at something on the shelf, if there's an Australian made versus international, I will always buy the Australian to support local producers. And I mean, the cost to produce is lowering. I think I've heard some Canadians say that it's not worth growing in Australia. I'm looking out at a sky right here with not a cloud in it.
Yeah.
And
we're in Melbourne.
I was going to say, you're clearly not in Melbourne, Matt.
No, but we have a lot of sun up here. We have good conditions. We have, the power to run a greenhouse is a lot less than, say, in Canada, because you are being powered by that sun. We're looking at green energy too. We're very much keen on green hydrogen, and we're looking at every way possible to try to incorporate that into our business. By buying locally also, you got less middlemen. You know, we're vertically integrated. If some Canadian company is selling it to a distributor who's selling it to a wholesaler who's selling it to a pharmacy, I mean, how many mouths is that feeding on the way through? And people are complaining about price. Well, that's part of the problem. I get it. People have complained about some of our prices, and I take that on the chin. But for all the reasons I've mentioned, what I haven't mentioned is the cost to set this business up over the last 6 years has been astronomical, as you can imagine. And so, we are endeavouring to bring down our product prices as best we can. Rocky is a higher price, and some would say, oh, that's because your cannabinoids are higher. Well, really, the development of that strain was the most costly, and getting the right pheno to market was not easy. Whereas Mariposa, OG Kush, it's a easier strain. We price based on how we can grow it, and so that's been really important.
Yeah, I think.
So sorry. Go on.
I was going to say, I think people also forget different strains have different yields, different grow cycles, these kinds of things. So that they don't actually all economically stack to the same, exact figures.
No, but it's our promise to the market, especially with I don't know if you knew, we launched our CBD 100, which is an isolate-based product, but the market was asking for it. I wasn't sure. I've always been a whole plant guy. And full spectrum to that effect. But, the market was asking for it. So we did it, and we came in at $174, which was, half the price of some of the Canadian imports, and certainly cheaper than most others. And we want to do that. If we can afford to do it, we want to give Australians the most affordable product we can. And, being private and independent, it's been challenging, just the sheer cost to set this up has been significant. We've persisted. Some weeks, in the past, before we were making revenue, I didn't know how to pay the wages some weeks. It was that crazy. But we persisted, and the result is we haven't been beholden to shareholders' demand for early returns. We haven't been beholden for ASX complex and costly reporting structures that are time consuming. Sure. Instead, I think we've been nimble. We've been as cost effective as we can be. We've been creative, and we've been very inclusive with all of our staff. And I suppose this has sort of allowed us to become profitable in our first full 12 months of revenue, albeit minor, but we're going to keep pushing forward. And I think, if we can turn this into a profitable, successful business, our customers, our patients are going to see the benefit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that probably ties in to the decision, maybe, that obviously you guys are now, it's public knowledge that you guys have signed a deal to supply product to Germany. But, if you're by that same logic, you'd imagine that would Germans be better off getting German-made cannabis in that same vein?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think all the stars aligned for that EU partnership. What happened was when Minister Hunt came out and legalised medical cannabis, he realised, I think his department realised, that it's going to be a slow burn, and these companies are not going to survive on Australian patients, for the first few years. A lot of them go out of business. And so he opened up the export, which as soon as he did that, because we had the same thought, how are we going to actually keep the doors open? California was one of the ways to do it, but California is a highly competitive market, not always easy to make a buck. And so the first thing we did is we jumped on a plane. We went to Berlin to a medical cannabis conference in Berlin back in 2018, I think it was. We'd found a gentleman by the name of David Henn, young CEO of Canna Medical, and he also has since had a sort of reverse takeover of Sendor, which is a large narcotics distribution business. Now, David and I just got along very well from day one. He's got similar values and ethics. We've become very good friends. He's been out here probably not since COVID, but prior to COVID, he'd been out here 5 times. I'd been out there 4 or 5 times. And that's to get to know each other personally and from a business perspective. And we aligned very quickly with understanding what he wanted, what his patients wanted, what we could provide, and meeting in the middle. And if it wasn't for that EU contract, we entered into a 3x3 pretty much straight away. If it wasn't for that, it would have been very hard to have kept the doors open while the Australian patient numbers grew. Now that partnership has really blossomed, and our, I suppose, our future there is very solid. But you're right, there will be the opportunity for Germans to grow for themselves, but it's going to be a while away. The amount of product that the Germans are allowed to produce themselves right now is still minimal, and they're still going to want exotic products from New Zealand and Australia. I think there's always going to be place for Australian-grown, New Zealand-grown produce around the world.
We're very exotic, aren't we?
I think so.
In Australia. It's interesting too that there's just been so much investment in the sector in Australia. I think has been contingent on companies opening up export channels. I know some with more success than others, but you guys, when we saw that announcement into Germany, it's great to see, some very high quality products heading over that way. Rocky's
the number one indica seller through David's distribution network, and the Germans are loving it, and Solus as well. So they're the only two probably. I think there's been a bit of speculation on what we do sell over there, but it is Rocky and Solus in our Hefe and Tangy-Chem format. But I want to be very clear with any Australian patients that might be listening that Australian patients take absolute precedence written into our contract. It's actually, Greg Hunt said that you must write into your contracts, which we did. Our German partners are fully aware of that. As the numbers in Australia grow, and notwithstanding there was the flour shortage back in Feb, and that was purely based on the fact that nobody predicted the demand. I wasn't listening to my inner head, my inner person. I was listening to other people's advice and saying, we'll start with this amount. Should have started with this amount. But yeah, I want to be very clear that Australian patients are number one, always take priority. And as I said, it's written into the contract. So we have to, if we want to service both masters, we have to find more canopy space in the future, which is what I'm focusing on heavily right now.
Is Greg Hunt a patient of ANTGs?
I don't know. We don't get to find that information. We only see the initial
information, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I always keep thinking, I'm like, it's just so curious how the ACT allows households to have 4 plants and the home grow amnesty. How many of those
doesn't need to be a patient. It doesn't need to be
exactly.
He can go walk down and grab. He grows his own. Probably,
just give him the Rocky seeds and off he goes.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of politicians' kids that live in Canberra, isn't there?
Yeah,
heaps.
Just saying.
No, it's almost like there's a business opportunity there, Mitch. Anyway, very good.
Well, I think we're probably coming to the close, but there's the one probably last little bit I think the people might be interested in, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, but just the future, I know that of ANTG, what's coming up, what's in the works. I know that you guys are looking at doing a couple of new products potentially.
Yes.
Maybe just giving the people or some of your loyal patients a little bit of a view as to what might be over the next year or so.
Yep. From a product point of view, where our breeding program is constantly churning with our plant wizard, and the one-to-ones that we're about to release are exceptionally good. I've not seen anything like it around the world. I think I mentioned 13.5% CBD and 12.5% THC. And it's got that Rocky and Eve combination there with some really good terps. But back in the breeding program at the research facility, because that product now is in full commercial production. It's actually being packed this week. But back in the breeding program, we've got some really wonderful, I think a lot of people would describe our products as a little bit diesely, mostly, maybe not Mariposa. And that's probably fairly true, but we've really got some good fruity strains genetics coming through with all the Tangy and Mandarini type things coming out of them. And that's probably 6 months away from coming into the market.
Okay.
And then there'll be some further breeding of those products with some of our existing products. But I suppose the point is we want to keep innovating. And I think that it's important to get a vape product on the market, because currently doctors that are willing to prescribe in vape format, they're currently providing a flower and obviously a vaporization kit or recommendation of such. And we would like to think that having a vape oil, which we need to educate on, because it's in its purest form. We're not going to adulterate it with anything really. It's going to be a pure product. So we need to educate people on that, but it's literally going to be the essence of the flowers that we've already released. And I think doctors will probably be, once they are educated on what's actually in the cartridge, I think that they'll be fairly willing to prescribe that, maybe more over flower. So I think that that's a big push. And of course, with the research we're doing, there's going to be other formats that we're looking at. If we're talking about a cancer patient, or we're talking about a pre-dementia patient or IBS, then of course we need to look at it. Maybe it's soft gel caps, maybe it's sublingual or wafers, maybe it's a whole bunch of other things. But the research that we do will tell us what's going to be the best format for the onset for that product, for that condition.
Sure, absolutely.
But other than that, I probably avoided the question a little bit. Look, ANTG, I'm so proud of everything we've done. I'm proud of my crew so much. And we're just going to go from strength to strength. We use an online communication tool, which has just been buzzing this whole time. The communication between bays, between mother room and GMP section, between head office and research. It's just constant. I think that's
Wizards. The Wizards in full flight is just on a mission. I love it.
He is,
Wizard chat.
Wizard chat.
But I'll have a chat with him about getting him on, because I'm sure he would love to. You won't stop him talking, though. That's any problem.
No, that sounds like the ideal guest. We'd love to pick his brain, but really appreciate you giving us at least the overview of all the breeding stuff that you guys are doing. I'm still yet to see other companies jumping in and getting around the actual, I guess, registration of IP rights over plants in the Australian space. So I think you guys are not just pioneering on the product side, but in many, many different ways. And we talked also about the export activity too. So no, it's all looking great for ANTG, and we're just kind of interested observers following on from the sidelines. But yeah, it's been great to see the rise of ANTG, and we know many patients who have spoken to us and given rave reviews about the products. So credit.
Great. I hope it's helping people. Thank you both. I've really appreciated the hour. It's been fun.
Excellent.
No, thank you so much for agreeing to chat with us. It's been insightful. Cheers.
No worries. Till next time.
Until next time. Thanks, Matt.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.